The sound of glass shattering against hardwood still echoes in my nightmares. That was the first thing I heard before Jack's voice cut through the dining room like a serrated knife, listing off 21 reasons why our marriage was over. 21. He had prepared a numbered list, delivered it in front of his mother, my sister, and our 3 closest couple friends while the roast chicken sat cooling on the table. I can still taste the bile that rose in my throat as reason number 7 accused me of being financially irresponsible. The metallic tang of shock coated my tongue. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months earlier to when I still believed we were happy. June in Phoenix is brutal, but our air-conditioned Spanish-style home near Arcadia felt like a sanctuary. I was 58 years old, married for 33 years, and convinced I had finally figured out the rhythm of life. Jack worked in commercial real estate. I volunteered at the Desert Botanical Garden twice a week, and we had dinner together most nights. Our daughter lived in Seattle with her family, and our son was finishing his residency in Boston. Empty nesters, sure, but comfortable ones. I remember standing in our kitchen that Tuesday morning, pouring Jack's coffee exactly how he liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of half and half, thinking how lucky I was that we still had these small rituals after all these years. I was an idiot. The first crack appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. Jack started working late more frequently, coming home after I'd already gone to bed. When I mentioned it felt like we barely saw each other anymore, he squeezed my shoulder and said the market was heating up, that he was closing deals that would set us up beautifully for retirement. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. So I pushed down the small voice, whispering that something felt off, that the man who used to text me throughout the day had gone silent for hours at a time. The silence in our house during those weeks felt different somehow. Not peaceful, but hollow. I'd walk through rooms we'd filled together. The living room with its oversized sectional we'd picked out on a trip to Los Angeles. The kitchen with copper pots hanging from the rack Jack installed himself one weekend. The bedroom with photos of our children at every age, and feel like a ghost haunting my own life. I tried to fill the emptiness with activity. I increased my volunteer hours at the botanical garden, spending long afternoons among the cacti and succulents, their resilience in the desert heat somehow comforting. One Thursday in late June, I stayed late to help prepare for a fundraising gala. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that photographers travel thousands of miles to capture. I was arranging centerpieces with another volunteer, a woman named Susan who'd been married for 40 years when she asked me something that lodged in my chest like a stone. "How are things with Jack? You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine," I said automatically. "Just adjusting to the empty nest, you know." Susan looked at me over a bouquet of desert marigolds, her expression knowing. When Bill started staying late at the office, I told myself the same thing, that he was just busy, that I was being paranoid. But if something feels off, Evelyn, it usually is. I laughed it off, made some joke about how we couldn't all have dramatic marriage problems. But her words followed me home that evening. I arrived to find our house dark, Jack's car not in the garage. I checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. The first tendril of real fear wrapped around my ribs. He came home at 11:30 that night. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book I hadn't absorbed a single word from. He looked surprised to see me up. "Why aren't you in bed?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I was waiting for you." "Where were you?" "I told you this morning, the Riverside deal. We took the clients to dinner." Had he told me that? I replayed the morning in my mind. Coffee, small talk about the weather, a kiss goodbye, no mention of a dinner. But his tone was so certain, so casual, that doubt crept in. "You didn't tell me," I said, keeping my voice level. "Evelyn, I definitely mentioned it. You were distracted, probably thinking about your garden thing." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You really should start writing things down if your memory's getting fuzzy." The comment felt like a slap disguised as concern. I sat there as he headed upstairs, wondering if I was losing pieces of myself I couldn't afford to lose. Then came the credit card statement in July. I handle most of our household finances, or at least I thought I did. Jack had always insisted we keep our accounts joint, said it showed trust, unity. But there on the Visa bill was a charge for $473 at a jewelry store I'd never heard of. No birthday gift had appeared, no anniversary surprise. When I asked him about it, standing in our bedroom with the statement in my trembling hands, he barely glanced up from his phone. That was for the Johnsons' anniversary gift, remember? We went to their party last month, except we hadn't given the Johnsons anything. I'd selected a wine basket from their registry and had it delivered. I knew this because I'd tracked the shipment. But when I opened my mouth to say so, Jack's expression shifted into something I'd never seen before. This look of patient condescension, like I was a confused child he had to humor. "Sweetheart, I think you're mixing things up. The wine basket was for the Clarks. The Johnsons got the jewelry piece, that decorative bowl you picked out, remember?" I hadn't picked out anything, but doubt crept in like smoke under a door. Had I forgotten? At 58, was my memory starting to fail? My mother had developed early-onset dementia in her 60s. The fear of following in her footsteps had haunted me for years. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe I was mixing things up. I went to my computer that night after Jack fell asleep. The blue glow of the screen illuminated our bedroom as I logged into our Amazon account and checked the order history. There it was, the wine basket, delivered to the Johnsons on June 15th. I took a screenshot, saved it to a folder on my desktop titled Garden Photos. Then I went back through 6 months of credit card statements, looking for other discrepancies. What I found made my hands shake so badly I had to close the laptop. Charges I didn't recognize at restaurants I'd never been to. Shopping trips that didn't match any purchases I remembered. A pattern of spending that told a story I didn't want to read. But when I confronted Jack the next morning, armed with my evidence, he turned it all around so skillfully I ended up apologizing to him. "You've been spying on me." His voice was quiet, hurt. "Going through my purchases like I'm some kind of criminal?" "Our purchases," I corrected. "These are on our joint account. Most of those are business expenses." He took the statements from my hands, his touch gentle. "Client dinners, gifts for deals closing. I'm working hard for us, Evelyn, and you're treating me like I'm doing something wrong. Is this what our marriage has come to? Surveillance and suspicion?" I felt about 3 inches tall. He was right. What was I doing, tracking his every purchase? When had I become this paranoid wife? He held me then, his arms around me, and I let myself sink into the embrace, desperately wanting to believe his explanations. "I'm sorry," I whispered against his shoulder. "I don't know what's wrong with me lately." "You're stressed," he said, kissing my forehead. "Maybe you should talk to someone about this anxiety. I'll find you a good therapist, someone who can help you work through these concerns before they damage us." This became the pattern. Small discrepancies that he explained away with such confidence that I questioned my own sanity. A withdrawal of $800 for a business dinner I'd never heard about. A weekend trip to Sedona he claimed I'd approved, even though I had no memory of the conversation. Each time I brought something up, he had an answer ready, delivered with this weary patience that made me feel like I was being unreasonable. The trip to Sedona particularly haunted me. Jack came home one Friday in late July and started packing a bag. I watched from the bedroom doorway, confused. "Where are you going?" "Sedona, remember? The golf weekend with the guys from the office. We talked about this last month. I had no memory of this conversation. None. I tried to remember, searching through weeks of interactions, but came up empty. You never mentioned a golf trip." He stopped packing and looked at me with such concern it made my stomach twist. "Honey, we had a whole conversation about this. You were worried about being alone for the weekend, and I told you to invite Linda over. You said you'd be fine, that you had plenty to do at the garden. The detail was so specific, so confident. Had we really had this conversation?" I pressed my palms against my temples, trying to force the memory to surface. My mother used to do the same thing in her final years, standing in rooms trying to remember why she'd entered them. "Okay," I said finally. "Have a good time." After he left, I called Linda. "Want to come over this weekend?" Jack's out of town. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Out of town where? Golf trip to Sedona. Funny, Linda said, her voice careful. Tom's at a conference in San Diego all weekend. He mentioned Jack was supposed to be going, too. My blood ran cold. Maybe he's doing both, I offered, but the excuse sounded weak even to me. Maybe, Linda said, but she didn't sound convinced. Listen, I'll come over Saturday. We need to talk. That Saturday with Linda was the first time someone held up a mirror to what was happening. We sat on my patio, the July heat oppressive even in the shade, drinking iced tea while I poured out everything. The forgotten conversations, the unexplained charges, the constant feeling that I was losing my grip on reality. Linda listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her glass and took both my hands in hers. You're not going crazy, she said firmly. But I think Jack might be gaslighting you. The term was familiar. I'd heard it on podcasts, read about it in articles, but applying it to my own marriage felt impossible. Gaslighting was what manipulative men did to weak women. Jack loved me. We'd built a life together. Just listen, Linda continued. Everything you're describing, the memory confusion, the isolation, the way he makes you doubt yourself, those are textbook signs. And the money stuff? Evelyn, that's financial abuse. I pulled my hands away. You're being dramatic. Jack would never. Wouldn't he? When was the last time you had lunch with Sarah? Or anyone from book club? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember. Months, maybe. Jack had made comments about how negative Sarah was after her divorce, how the book club women just gossiped. I'd pulled away to keep the peace, to focus on my marriage. They were your friends first, Linda pressed. You've known Sarah since our kids were in elementary school, and now you barely talk to her. Why? Because she's going through a hard time, and I didn't want to. I stopped, hearing how it sounded. I didn't want to upset Jack. Linda's expression broke my heart. It was pity and anger and fear all mixed together. Oh, honey. We spent the rest of that afternoon mapping out a plan. Linda insisted I start documenting everything, conversations, purchases, discrepancies. She made me promise to reconnect with at least one friend. And she made me swear that if things got worse, I'd talk to a lawyer. I'm sure it's not that serious, I protested. Maybe we just need counseling. Then suggest counseling, Linda challenged. See what he says. I did suggest it. The following week, when Jack returned from Sedona with a tan and stories about golf games I suspected he'd never played. We were having dinner, one of the increasingly rare nights we ate together, when I brought it up. I think we should see a marriage counselor. Jack's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Why would we need that? I just think it might help us communicate better. Work through some of the tension. What tension? He set down his fork, his full attention on me now. Are you still obsessing over that financial stuff? I thought we'd moved past your anxiety issues. It's not anxiety issues. I kept my voice calm. I just think we could benefit from talking to someone neutral. The air in the room changed. Jack stood up, his chair scraping against the tile floor. Let me get this straight. You want us to pay some stranger to listen to you accuse me of things I haven't done? You want to air our private business because you can't trust your own husband. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Evelyn? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like you're determined to find problems where none exist. I've been working my ass off to give us a good life, and you're treating me like a criminal. I'm not. Maybe you're the one who needs therapy. Individual therapy. For this paranoia, this obsession with controlling every aspect of our finances, this need to create drama where there isn't any. He left the room, left me sitting at the table with tears streaming down my face, wondering how suggesting counseling had turned into an attack on my mental health. That was Jack's gift, turning every conversation around until I was the problem. I was the one who needed fixing. The isolation had been so gradual I hadn't noticed it happening. Looking back now, I can trace it clearly, like following a trail of breadcrumbs into a dark forest. Jack started making comments about my friends. How Sarah talked too much about her divorce. How maybe her negativity was affecting my mood. How the book club I'd belonged to for 15 years was just a bunch of bored women gossiping. Wouldn't I rather spend Tuesday evenings with him? Having quality time together? It sounded romantic when he said it, his hand on my knee, his eyes warm. One by one, I let those connections fade. I stopped returning Sarah's calls as frequently. I missed book club meetings, then quit altogether. Jack praised me for prioritizing our marriage, said it showed maturity that I didn't need constant external validation like some women our age. I glowed under his approval. Starved for affection, I didn't realize he'd been rationing. My sister Linda noticed before I did. She lives in Scottsdale, just 20 minutes away, but our lunches had become less frequent. When she cornered me at our father's birthday party in August, pulling me aside in Dad's backyard while the rest of the family clustered around the grill, her concern was palpable. "Where have you been?" she asked, gripping my arm. "I've called you 6 times in the last 2 weeks. Jack keeps saying you're busy or not feeling well." "I'm fine," I insisted, even as something in my chest tightened. Just overwhelmed with the house and everything. Linda's eyes searched my face. "You don't seem fine. You seem, I don't know, diminished somehow." The words stung because part of me recognized the truth in it. But I laughed it off, hugged her, promised we'd get lunch soon. Jack appeared then, sliding his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Everything okay over here?" The way Linda looked at him should have told me something. This flash of something I couldn't quite read. But I was too focused on smoothing things over, on being the good wife who didn't cause scenes at family gatherings. After the party, on the drive home, Jack was quiet. Not the comfortable silence of a long marriage, but something tighter, more controlled. I stared out the window at the desert landscape flying past, the saguaros standing like sentinels in the fading light. "Linda seemed upset," I ventured. "Your sister has always been dramatic." Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "She's probably jealous." "Jealous? Of what?" "Of us. Of what we have." "She's been divorced twice, Evelyn. Misery loves company." Linda wasn't miserable. She was thriving, actually, running her own consulting business and dating a kind man who treated her well. But I didn't argue. Arguing with Jack had become exhausting, a battle I always seemed to lose. "I think she's worried about me," I said quietly. "Because you've been pulling away from everyone." Jack glanced at me, his expression softening. "I know you don't see it, sweetheart, but your behavior has changed. The forgetfulness, the paranoia, the way you've isolated yourself. People are starting to notice. Linda's not the only one who's expressed concern." This stopped my breath. "Who else?" "The Mitchells mentioned something last month, and David Chen asked if you were feeling all right." I hadn't seen the Mitchells or the Chens in months. How would they know anything about me unless Jack had told them? The realization settled like ice in my stomach. He wasn't just gaslighting me privately. He was building a public narrative, telling our friends and family that I was unstable, unreliable, declining, laying groundwork for something I couldn't yet see. The financial bleeding was worse than I'd realized. This I discovered in September purely by accident when our mortgage company called to discuss a late payment. Late payment? We'd never missed a mortgage payment in 33 years. I checked our joint checking account, the one I thought held our combined incomes, and felt the floor drop out from under me. The balance was $3,000. It should have been closer to $30,000. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone as I called Jack. He was in a meeting, his secretary said. Could she take a message? I left my number, sat on the couch in our living room, and tried to understand what I was looking at. The last 6 months of statements showed transfers I didn't recognize. 10,000 here, 8,000 there. Steady withdrawals that had drained our account like a slow hemorrhage. I spent that afternoon going through every financial record I could find. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit cards. The more I discovered, the worse it got. Our savings account, the one we'd built over decades, had been transferred somewhere I couldn't track. The credit card I thought we'd paid off was maxed out with charges I'd never made. Even the account for our property taxes, which should have had enough to cover the next payment, was empty. My phone rang. Jack's name on the screen. I answered with shaking hands. "What's the emergency?" he asked, sounding annoyed. "I'm in the middle of negotiations." "Where is our money?" My voice came out thin, scared. "What are you talking about?" "The checking account. There's only $3,000 left. The savings is empty." "Jack, what happened to our money?" The sigh that came through the phone was long-suffering, the sound of a patient man dealing with an unreasonable child. I moved it, for investments. "We discussed this." "We absolutely did not discuss this." August 23rd, we were having breakfast on the patio. "You said I should do whatever I thought was best for our financial future." I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "I never said that. I would never agree to emptying our accounts without discussing it first." There was a pause, and when Jack spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder. "Evelyn, I'm getting really concerned about these memory lapses. This is becoming a serious problem. I'm not the one with memory lapses." I nearly screamed it. "You're lying to me." "I'm going to come home," he said, his tone suddenly gentle, in a way that frightened me more than his anger. "We need to talk about getting you help. This paranoia, these delusions, they're not delusions." I hung up, threw my phone across the room, and sat in the wreckage of my disintegrating reality. When Jack came home that evening, I had the statements spread across the dining room table like evidence at a crime scene. His face did something complicated when he saw them. This micro-expression of panic quickly smoothed into irritation. "What is all this? What is this?" I gestured at the papers, my voice shaking. "Jack, where is our money?" He sighed, this long-suffering sound that immediately put me on the defensive. "This is why I handle the investments, remember? You get too emotional about money. I'm emotional because $30,000 is missing from our checking account. It's not missing." He poured himself scotch from the bar cart, his movements deliberate, controlled. "It's invested. I moved it into a high-yield opportunity. Commercial property in Tempe. It's going to double our money in 18 months, without telling me." I mentioned it. "You said fine. Do whatever you think is best." I never said that. His jaw tightened. "Are we really going to do this again? Are we going to have the same conversation where you forget things and then accuse me of lying?" The room spun slightly. Had we talked about this? Could I have forgotten something this important? My mother's face flashed through my mind, the way she'd lost chunks of time in her last years, the confusion in her eyes. Was this how it started? "Maybe you should see a doctor," Jack said, his voice gentler now, concerned. "This forgetfulness, these accusations, it's not healthy, sweetheart." I wanted to argue. God, I wanted to fight back. But the doubt had burrowed so deep I couldn't find solid ground to stand on. That night, I lay awake in our king-sized bed, listening to Jack snore beside me, and wondered if I was losing my mind. But something Linda had said kept circling back. "Trust yourself." So the next morning, after Jack left for work, I did something I'd never done before. I called our bank and asked to speak to a manager. I explained that I needed copies of all account transfers for the last year, that I was one of the account holders, and wanted to review our financial activity. The manager, a woman named Patricia with a kind voice, said she'd prepare everything, and I could pick it up that afternoon. When I arrived at the bank, she handed me a thick envelope and asked quietly if everything was all right. "I'm not sure," I admitted. She glanced around, then leaned closer. "If you have concerns about unauthorized access to your accounts, we have resources that can help. Financial abuse is more common than people think." There was that word again, abuse. I thanked her, took the envelope home, and spread everything across my bed. 2 hours later, I had traced it all. Transfers to accounts I'd never heard of, cashier's checks made out to names I didn't recognize, withdrawals that bled us dry over months, and nowhere in any of these transactions was my signature. Jack had forged it, over and over again. The next few weeks passed in a fog of self-doubt and quiet investigation. I started keeping notes on my phone, documenting conversations, checking and rechecking my memory against reality. I felt like I was conducting surveillance on my own life, searching for proof that I wasn't crazy. The isolation Jack had engineered meant I had no one to reality check with. No trusted friend to tell me whether my concerns were valid or paranoid. Then came the rumor, the one that changed everything. I was at the farmer's market near downtown Phoenix, a Saturday morning ritual I'd maintained, despite Jack's subtle suggestions that the produce wasn't any better than what we could get at the grocery store. I was examining heirloom tomatoes when I heard my name. 2 women I recognized from the neighborhood were standing near the herb vendor, and they hadn't noticed me yet. "I feel so bad for her," one of them said, her voice carrying in the morning air. "Jack told Richard that she's been really struggling. Memory problems, erratic behavior. He's trying to be supportive, but it's taking a toll." The tomato slipped from my hand, splitting open on the pavement. The women turned, their faces flushing when they saw me. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the full weight of it crashed over me. Jack wasn't just gaslighting me in private. He was spreading this narrative to our friends, our community, building a story about my mental decline. For what purpose? The question burned through the fog of confusion like a flare. If I was supposedly losing my mind, if I couldn't be trusted to remember conversations or make decisions, then who would question Jack's control over our finances? Who would challenge his version of events? He was creating a narrative that would justify everything, the missing money, the isolated wife, whatever came next. I drove home in a daze, but instead of parking in our driveway, I kept going. I ended up at a coffee shop near ASU, sat in my car, and let the tears come. Not delicate, quiet crying, but the kind of sobbing that shakes your whole body, the kind that leaves you gasping for air. When I could finally breathe again, I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in almost 3 years. I called my old college roommate, Martha. We'd been close once, back when we were young and fierce and convinced we could change the world. Martha had gone into social work, dedicated her life to helping victims of domestic abuse in Chicago. We'd drifted apart over the years, the way people do when life pulls them in different directions. But when she answered after the 3rd ring, her voice warm and surprised, something inside me broke open. "Evelyn, is everything okay?" "I don't know." The words tumbled out. "I think my husband is stealing from me, and I think I'm going crazy, and I don't know which is worse." Martha didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't suggest I was being paranoid or hormonal or confused. She listened as I poured out everything, the missing money, the gaslighting, the isolation, the rumors. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "everything you're describing is textbook financial abuse combined with coercive control. And the fact that he's spread rumors about your mental state? That's called reputation damage. It's a tactic abusers use to make sure no one believes the victim when they finally speak up." Abuser. The word hit me like cold water. Jack wasn't an abuser. Abusers were monsters, violent criminals. We had a nice house. He'd never hit me. How could this be abuse? As if reading my mind, Martha continued. Abuse isn't always physical. Financial abuse happens when someone controls another person's access to economic resources. It's about power and control. And sweetheart, based on what you're telling me, you need to start protecting yourself right now. She walked me through the steps. Document everything. Get copies of all financial records. Open a separate bank account he doesn't know about. Start rebuilding connections with friends and family. Most importantly, talk to a lawyer. Not yet for divorce, but just to understand my rights, my options. I have copies of the transfers, I told her. From the bank. His signatures are forged. Martha was quiet for a beat. Evelyn, that's fraud. That's a crime. You need to take those to a lawyer today. Not next week. Today. But I can't, I whispered. What if I'm wrong? What if there's an explanation I'm not seeing? Listen to me. Martha's voice was firm but gentle. You're not wrong. And even if by some miracle there's an explanation, a lawyer can help you understand your options. You're not committing to anything by getting legal advice. You're just protecting yourself. I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes after we hung up, phone clutched in my shaking hands, staring at the list of names Martha had texted me. 3 lawyers who specialized in financial abuse and elder law. The word elder stung. I was 58, not ancient, but apparently that's how the law saw me. Vulnerable, susceptible to exploitation. Was I vulnerable? I'd always thought of myself as capable, independent. I'd raised 2 children, managed a household, volunteered, maintained friendships. But somewhere along the way, Jack had convinced me I was fragile, forgetful, unreliable, and I'd believed him. I called the first lawyer on the list. The receptionist said they were booked for 3 weeks. I called the second. Same story. When I called the third, Rebecca Garner, attorney at law, I must have sounded desperate because the receptionist put me on hold, then came back with an opening the next afternoon. Someone had a cancellation, she said. Can you make it at 2? I'll be there. That night, Jack came home late again. I was in bed, pretending to sleep, when I heard him moving through the house. The clink of ice in a glass, his nightly scotch, the rustle of papers in his office, then silence. I lay in the dark, eyes wide open, and wondered what he was doing in there, hiding more evidence. Creating more fraudulent documents? Planning his next move? The next morning, I told Jack I had a doctor's appointment. He barely looked up from his phone. Everything okay? Just a checkup, I said, marveling at how easily the lie came. Rebecca Garner's office was nothing like I'd expected. I'd pictured something sterile and intimidating, all glass and chrome. Instead, her suite was warm, decorated in earth tones, with plants on every surface and art that looked like it came from local galleries. She greeted me herself, a woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Tell me everything, she said once we were seated in her office, and I did. For 90 minutes, I laid out the entire story, the gaslighting, the isolation, the missing money, the forged signatures. Rebecca took notes, asked clarifying questions, never once made me feel foolish or paranoid. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy, part fury. "How are you holding up?" she asked. The question surprised me. I'd expected her to jump straight to legal strategy, to start talking about options and procedures. Instead, she was asking about me. I don't know, I admitted. Some moments I feel strong, like I'm finally seeing clearly. Other moments, I wonder if I've constructed this whole narrative in my head, if Jack's right and I'm losing my grip on reality. You're not. Rebecca's voice was absolute. What you've described is a textbook pattern of financial abuse and coercive control. The isolation, the gaslighting, the reputation damage, the fraudulent transactions, these are tactics, Evelyn. Deliberate choices your husband has made to maintain power and control while stealing from you. Hearing it said so plainly, so definitively, broke something open in me. I started crying, and Rebecca handed me tissues without comment, let me sob until I could breathe again. "What do I do now?" I asked. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "First, we document everything you haven't already documented. Second, we get you a separate bank account he can't access.
Third, we file for a protective order on your assets so he can't drain anything else. Fourth, we start building the case for divorce with a forensic accounting of everything he's taken. Divorce. The word hung in the air between us. I'd been married for 33 years. Divorce felt like failure, like giving up, like admitting that half my life had been built on sand. I know this is overwhelming, Rebecca said gently. You don't have to decide everything today. But Evelyn, you need to protect yourself. The longer you wait, the more he can hide. The harder it becomes to recover what he's stolen. We talked for another hour. She gave me the names of therapists who specialized in abuse recovery, support groups for victims of financial exploitation, a checklist of immediate steps to take. She also explained the legal landscape, community property laws, forensic accounting, the difficulty of pressing criminal charges versus civil recovery in divorce proceedings. When I left her office, I had a plan. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But for the first time in months, I also had hope. Not hope that Jack and I could fix this, but hope that I could survive it. That there was a path forward, even if it led somewhere I'd never imagined going. We talked for another hour. She gave me the names of lawyers in Phoenix who specialized in financial abuse cases, support groups for victims, resources I didn't know existed. When we finally hung up, I sat in my car in the coffee shop parking lot and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Clarity. Later, I learned that studies indicate over $20 billion is stolen each year by people close to victims, caregivers, family members, spouses. 20 billion. I wasn't some naive fool. I was a statistic in an epidemic of financial abuse that happened behind closed doors in nice neighborhoods to educated women who thought it couldn't happen to them. That night marked the beginning of my awakening. The beginning of the fight. Over the next 6 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. While Jack went to work, I went to war. I gathered every financial document I could find. Bank statements, investment accounts, credit card bills, tax returns. I created a secret email account and forwarded everything to Martha, who helped me make sense of the financial maze. What we discovered made my previous concerns look quaint. Jack had opened 3 credit cards in my name without my knowledge. The applications, which I obtained from the credit card companies, had forged signatures that looked almost but not quite like mine. He'd taken out a home equity line of credit against our house, draining $80,000 into an account I'd never heard of. He'd cashed out my IRA, the one I'd been building since my 20s, the one that was supposed to secure my retirement. Gone. All of it funneled into accounts I couldn't access, investments I'd never heard of, and cash withdrawals that left no paper trail. The IRA discovery nearly broke me. I found the paperwork buried in Jack's office filing cabinet, hidden behind old tax returns. The cash out had happened in June, just a few weeks before I'd first noticed something was wrong. $247,000. Gone. Converted to cash, according to the forms, with my signature scrawled at the bottom. Except it wasn't my signature. Close, but the E in Evelyn was wrong, and I never looped mine that way. I held that document in my trembling hands and remembered every paycheck I'd deposited into that IRA over 25 years of teaching. Every automatic transfer on the 15th of the month, money I'd put aside even when we were struggling to pay for braces and college tuition. That account represented my independence, my security, my promise to myself that I'd never be dependent on anyone else in my old age. And Jack had erased it with forged paperwork and lies. The phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but it was my daughter calling from Seattle. Emily, 31, brilliant and kind, with her father's quick mind and what I'd always thought was my intuition. I composed myself, cleared my throat, and answered. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. How are you? I'm fine, sweetheart. The lie tasted like ash. How are the kids? We talked for 15 minutes about her children, her job, the Seattle rain. The whole time I wanted to scream at her that her father was stealing from me, that my life was collapsing, that I needed help. But I couldn't. What would I say? How do you tell your daughter that her father is a thief and a liar?
That the marriage she'd grown up watching, that she'd referenced in her own wedding vows as an example of lasting love, was built on manipulation and fraud? After we hung up, I sat in Jack's office for another hour, methodically photographing every document I could find. Bank statements, investment records, loan applications, credit card bills. I created a digital trail that Jack couldn't erase, uploading everything to a cloud account he didn't know existed. With each photo, I felt myself changing. The confused, doubting woman I'd been was hardening into someone else, someone who would fight back. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and let myself finally feel the rage. Not the confused hurt of the past months, but pure, crystalline fury. This man I'd trusted, built a life with, raised children with, had been systematically robbing me. Not stealing from us, but from me specifically. The IRA was in my name. The credit cards were in my name. He was building debt and erasing assets tied to me while protecting his own finances. The fury that rose in me was different from anything I'd felt before. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was cold, sharp, surgical. I started playing a role, pretending everything was normal while I built my case. I smiled at Jack over breakfast. I asked about his day. I played the dutiful wife while secretly photographing documents, recording conversations, creating a trail of evidence. The recording app on my phone became my best friend. Every financial conversation, every time Jack claimed we'd discussed something I knew we hadn't, I captured it. Arizona is a one-party consent state, which meant I could legally record conversations I was part of. The evidence mounted. On September 28th, we had a conversation that I played for my lawyer the next day. Jack had come home late again, and I'd asked casually about his evening. "Just drinks with the Tempe investors," he said, kissing my cheek. "Oh, the ones from the property deal? The $30,000 investment?" He paused, just for a fraction of a second. "That's right. How's that going? When do we see returns?" "Early next year, probably. These things take time." I nodded, smiled, and the whole conversation was captured, because there was no Tempe property deal. I'd called the investor group Jack had mentioned. The company didn't exist. The address he'd given me for the property was a vacant lot. $30,000 had vanished into thin air, and Jack had just confirmed he'd lied about where it went. Martha connected me with a lawyer in Phoenix who specialized in elder financial abuse. Yes, elder, because at 58, I qualified. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca, who reminded me of Linda, laid it out in terms I couldn't deny. Jack had committed fraud, multiple counts. The evidence I'd gathered was damning. Rebecca's office was in a high-rise overlooking Camelback Mountain. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the desert stretching to the horizon, and I remember thinking how appropriate it was, laying bare my life at such heights, where everything looked different, clearer. "This is one of the most documented cases I've seen," Rebecca said, flipping through the files I'd brought. "Most victims don't catch on this quickly, or gather this much evidence. The forged signatures alone are enough for criminal charges." My stomach dropped. "Criminal charges?" Rebecca looked up, her expression serious. "Evelyn, your husband has committed fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Yes, vulnerable. Under Arizona law, that includes financial exploitation between spouses where there's a pattern of coercive control. These are felonies. I don't want him to go to jail." The words came automatically. "I just want my money back." "But here's what you need to understand," Rebecca said during our second meeting, her office overlooking Camelback Mountain. "Even with all this evidence, proving financial abuse in court is complicated. Arizona is a community property state, which means arguing that he stole from himself gets tricky. What we can do is file for divorce, request a forensic accounting, and make damn sure you get what you're entitled to in the settlement." I didn't want a divorce. Even after everything, some pathetic part of me still hoped we could fix this, that confronting Jack with the evidence would shock him into honesty, into being the man I'd married. Rebecca must have seen this on my face because she leaned forward, her expression compassionate but firm. Evelyn, do you know what the most dangerous time is for a victim of financial abuse? When they try to leave? No. When they expose the abuser's scheme. That's when the manipulation escalates. That's when they get desperate. You need to be prepared for that. I wasn't prepared. How could I be? The unraveling came faster than I expected. In early October, Jack's mother called to arrange a dinner party. Just family and a few close friends, she said. Nothing fancy. I knew something was off when Jack seemed almost eager about it. When he insisted I make my special roasted chicken. When he suggested inviting Linda and her husband. Our friends, the Mitchells and the Cohens. Looking back, I can see it was a preemptive strike. He'd somehow sensed my investigation, maybe noticed documents out of place, maybe saw through my performance of normalcy. Or perhaps it was always part of his plan, destroy me publicly before I could expose him privately. The night of the dinner, I spent hours in the kitchen, preparing the meal with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I knew. Somehow, I knew this was going to be the night everything exploded. I just didn't know how. The chicken was in the oven, filling the house with the scent of rosemary and lemon. I'd set the table with our good china, the wedding pattern we'd registered for 33 years ago. Candles flickered in hurricane glasses. Everything looked perfect, like a stage set for a play I hadn't been given the script to. Linda arrived first with her husband Tom. She took one look at my face and pulled me into the kitchen. "What's wrong? You look terrified." "I'm fine," I lied, but my hands trembled as I checked the chicken. She lowered her voice. "You haven't returned my calls in 3 days. Did something happen?" I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not with Jack's mother due to arrive any minute. Not with our friends coming. Not with whatever Jack had planned looming over us. I just shook my head, squeezed her hand, and returned to playing hostess. We were seated around the table, chicken carved and plated, wine poured, when Jack cleared his throat. He stood up, and the conversation died. Everyone looked at him expectantly, probably anticipating a toast. Instead, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and smoothed it on the table. "I've asked you all here tonight because I need witnesses," he began, his voice steady, rehearsed. "I can't live like this anymore." "Jack, what are you talking about?" his mother asked, confusion creasing her face. That's when he started listing them. 21 reasons why he was divorcing me. He read them like a prosecutor delivering an indictment. Number 1, she's become financially irresponsible, draining our accounts for frivolous purchases. Number 2, she's neglected our home and herself. Number 3, she's pushed away everyone who cares about her. On and on. Each reason more outrageous than the last. Each one a twisted inversion of the truth. By reason number 5, she's developed an unhealthy obsession with controlling my business dealings. I could feel the blood draining from my face. He was doing it. Right now, in front of everyone, he was flipping the narrative, making himself the victim of my alleged instability. Number 6. She makes wild accusations with no basis in reality. Number 7. She's shown signs of severe cognitive decline, but refuses to see a doctor. I sat frozen, a piece of chicken growing cold on my fork as Jack systematically destroyed me in front of the people I loved. The roomful of witnesses grew uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. Linda started to interrupt, but Jack held up his hand. "Please, let me finish. I've tried to be patient, to get her help, but she refuses to acknowledge there's a problem." Number 7. She's shown signs of severe cognitive decline, but refuses to see a doctor. That's when I threw my wine glass. I didn't plan it. The motion was pure reflex, pure rage finally boiling over. The glass hit the wall behind Jack, shattering into glittering shards, red wine running down the cream paint like blood. The silence that followed was absolute. Then I stood up, my chair scraping harsh against the floor. My voice, when it came, was steady. Cold. "That's an interesting story, Jack. Should I tell them the real one?" His face went pale. "Sit down, Evelyn." "No." I turned to face our guests, these people who'd known us for decades.
Jack has stolen over $200,000 from our joint accounts. He's opened credit cards in my name, cashed out my retirement, and taken a home equity line against our house, all without my knowledge or consent. And when I started to figure it out, he began spreading rumors about my mental health to make sure no one would believe me. Jack's mother gasped. The Cohens and Mitchells exchanged shocked glances. Linda's expression told me she'd suspected something was wrong all along. "She's delusional," Jack said, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, these paranoid accusations." I pulled out my phone, hands remarkably steady now that the moment had finally arrived. I have bank statements, credit card applications with my forged signature, recordings of conversations where you gaslight me about things I know happened. I have a forensic accountant's report, a lawyer, and a clear memory of every lie you've told. So go ahead, Jack, keep reading your list. The dinner party dissolved into chaos. Jack tried to maintain control, but Linda was already on her feet, demanding to see the evidence. His mother looked between us, confusion and dawning horror on her face. The Mitchells quietly excused themselves. The Cohens stayed, Mrs. Cohen gripping my hand and whispering, "I'm so sorry we didn't see it." Jack's mother, Barbara, stood frozen by her chair, one hand pressed to her mouth. "Jack," she said, her voice shaking, "tell me this isn't true." "Mom, don't listen to her. She's not well. This is what I've been trying to tell everyone." I held up my phone. "I have recordings, Barbara, of Jack claiming we had conversations that never happened, of him lying about where money went. Would you like to hear them?" Jack's face transformed. The mask of concerned husband dropped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You've been recording me?" His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You really are unstable." "One-party consent state," Rebecca had coached me. "You're allowed to record conversations you're part of. Don't let him intimidate you." I played one. Just one recording, from 2 weeks earlier. Jack's voice filled the dining room, clear and casual, talking about an investment we'd supposedly discussed at length. Then my voice, confused, saying I didn't remember that conversation. His response, patient and condescending, suggesting I write things down if my memory was failing. Then I showed them the bank records from that same day, proving no such investment existed. The room was silent except for the recording. When it ended, Barbara sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face. "How long?" she whispered. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months that I know of." I kept my voice level, maybe longer. I'm still uncovering the extent of it. That night was the first domino, the confrontation I'd been building toward, terrified of, finally here. And you know what? It felt like stepping out of quicksand onto solid ground. The weeks that followed were brutal. Jack hired a lawyer, a slick guy from Scottsdale who specialized in contentious divorces. They tried every tactic, claiming I was unstable, demanding I undergo a psychiatric evaluation, arguing that the money he'd moved was his to manage as he saw fit. But Rebecca was better. The forensic accounting laid bare every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every lie. The psychiatric evaluation demand particularly enraged me. Jack's lawyer filed a motion claiming I was mentally incompetent to participate in divorce proceedings, citing my alleged memory problems and erratic behavior. Rebecca fought it, but the judge ordered an evaluation anyway. I sat in a psychiatrist's office for 3 hours, answering questions about my mental state, my memory, my relationship history. The psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Chen who specialized in elder abuse, saw through Jack's tactics immediately. "Your cognitive function is entirely normal," she told me after the evaluation. "In fact, you're remarkably lucid and detailed in your recollections. What you're describing isn't memory loss. It's trauma response to sustained psychological abuse." Her report demolished Jack's narrative. Not only was I competent, but her evaluation documented the abuse I'd suffered, providing additional evidence for Rebecca's case. When Jack's lawyer received the report, they stopped pushing the mental incompetence angle. Jack moved out 2 days after the dinner party, packed his clothes while I was at Linda's, left his key on the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, I walked through our house without feeling like I was being watched, judged, manipulated. The silence was different now, not hollow, clean, but the silence also brought its own challenges. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, my heart pounding, convinced I'd heard someone in the house. I'd check and recheck that the doors were locked, that the security system was armed. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but I couldn't seem to turn it off. Linda stayed with me for the first week. We fell into an easy rhythm: morning coffee on the patio, evenings watching terrible reality TV, talking when I needed to, and sitting in comfortable silence when I didn't. One night, she asked me something I'd been avoiding thinking about. "Are you going to tell the kids?" I'd been putting it off. Emily and Jake, both in their 30s with families of their own, deserved to know. But I dreaded the conversation, dreaded destroying their image of their father, their memories of family dinners and vacations, and ordinary moments that now felt tainted. "Eventually," I said, "when I can get through the story without falling apart." Linda reached over and squeezed my hand. "They'll understand. And if they don't at first, they will eventually." But the smear campaign intensified. Jack told anyone who would listen that I'd had a breakdown, that I'd attacked him at a family dinner, that my accusations were the result of early onset dementia like my mother. Some people believed him. The Mitchells stopped returning my calls. A few women from my old book club sent polite but distant responses when I reached out. I ran into Carol Mitchell at the grocery store 2 weeks after Jack moved out. She saw me in the produce section and quickly turned her cart in the opposite direction. The rejection stung, even though I'd expected it. Carol and I had been friends for over a decade. Our kids had played together. We'd shared countless dinners and conversations, and now she couldn't even look at me. But more people believed me. Linda became my fiercest defender, telling anyone who asked exactly what Jack had done. The Cohens spread the truth through our social circle. Even Barbara, after seeing the evidence, cut off contact with her son and called to apologize to me in tears. Barbara's phone call came on a Tuesday evening. I almost didn't answer, afraid it would be her defending Jack, demanding I reconsider. Instead, her first words were an apology. "I should have seen it," she sobbed. "All those years, and I didn't see what he was doing to you." We talked for over an hour. She told me about things she'd noticed but dismissed: Jack's controlling behavior, his tendency to rewrite history, small cruelties I'd hidden from everyone. She'd chalked it up to normal marriage friction, to Jack being stressed about work, to me being too sensitive. Now she saw it all differently. "I failed you," she said. "I'm his mother. I should have raised him better than this." "This isn't your fault, Barbara. I meant it. Jack made his choices. We both loved him, and he manipulated that love. But we're not responsible for what he chose to do." The breaking point came in November, during a mediation session. Jack sat across the table from me, his lawyer whispering in his ear, and I saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not the charming man I'd married, not the husband I'd built a life with. A stranger. A con artist who'd spent 3 decades perfecting his mark. "Evelyn," his lawyer began, "my client is willing to offer a generous settlement if we can avoid the publicity of a trial." Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "Define generous." Jack's expression flickered. "We both know that dragging this through court will be expensive and embarrassing for everyone involved. I'm prepared to offer a 60-40 split of remaining assets if Evelyn agrees to sign a non-disclosure agreement." The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. He'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now he wanted to buy my silence with money that was legally mine anyway. "No," I said simply. "We're going to court." Jack's facade cracked then, this cold fury flashing across his face. "You're going to regret this. Everyone's going to know what kind of person you really are."
I think they already do, Jack. The difference is now they know what kind of person you are, too. We never made it to trial. 2 weeks before our court date, Rebecca called with news. Jack had agreed to a settlement. Full forensic accounting of all assets. 70-30 split in my favor to account for the fraud, and no non-disclosure agreement. He was keeping the house. I didn't want it anymore anyway, too many ghosts. But I was walking away with enough to rebuild. More importantly, word had spread through our social circle in Phoenix. The rumors Jack had carefully planted about my mental decline were replaced with the truth about his financial abuse. His reputation in the commercial real estate community took a hit. His mother stopped speaking to him for months. Friends chose sides, and most chose mine. Did he face criminal charges? No. That's the frustrating reality of financial abuse within marriages. Proving criminal fraud when community property laws are involved is nearly impossible. Jack didn't go to jail. He kept working, kept living his life, probably moved on to some new scheme or victim. But he lost me. He lost his reputation. He lost the life he'd built on my suffering and silence. And in a strange way, that had to be enough. Studies reveal that abuse victims are 2.3 times more likely to suffer depression years later. I think about that statistic often, about the invisible scars that outlast the visible damage. Jack might have pushed me down. He spent years systematically destroying my confidence and stealing my security. But I'll be damned if he gets to keep me there. The real justice came in smaller, quieter ways. It came the day I moved into a modest condo in downtown Phoenix, boxes stacked in rooms full of possibility. It came when I reconnected with Sarah and the book club, when I told them everything, and they surrounded me with support instead of judgment. It came when I started therapy, actually started unpacking the damage and rebuilding my sense of self. It came when I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in 40 years. I'd loved art in college, had dreams of being a painter before practical concerns steered me toward a teaching degree and then into marriage and motherhood. Somewhere along the way, I'd packed away the canvases and told myself there wasn't time, that it was selfish, that other priorities mattered more. My therapist suggested it, not as some generic advice about finding hobbies, but as a specific form of processing trauma. Paint what you feel, she said. Don't think about making good art. Just let it out. The first painting was ugly. Harsh reds and blacks, violent slashes across the canvas, rage made visible. But the act of creating it, of taking the churning emotions inside me and putting them somewhere outside my body, was transformative. I painted Jack's face, then covered it with layers of color until it disappeared. I painted our house, then burned it in oils of orange and gold. I painted myself, small and gray, then larger and more vivid with each new canvas. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I had enough paintings for a small show. A friend who owns a gallery in Roosevelt Row offered me wall space, probably out of pity at first, but when she saw the work, her expression changed. "These are powerful," she said, studying a piece I'd titled Erasure. This series tells a story. The opening was small, just friends and a few art enthusiasts who wandered in off the street. But standing in that gallery, surrounded by visual evidence of my journey from victim to survivor, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not despite what I'd been through, but because of how I'd fought through it. Linda bought the first painting. Martha flew in from Chicago and bought 3. Even Jack's mother came, tearful and apologetic, and purchased one of the gentler pieces. A landscape I'd painted from memory of a trip Jack and I took to Sedona in our early years, before everything went wrong. "You're so talented," she whispered, hugging me. "I'm sorry I didn't see what he was doing to you." I forgave her. Not because what Jack did was her fault, but because holding on to anger felt like carrying rocks in my pockets. I'd spent too many years weighed down. The art became my rebirth. Not just the painting itself, but what it represented. Permission to be creative, to be messy, to exist outside the narrow confines Jack had constructed for me. I joined a community studio, took classes,
met other artists who were also rebuilding their lives from various disasters. We supported each other, shared materials and stories and hope. The studio became a sanctuary. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I'd arrive with my supplies and lose myself in color and form. Some nights I painted abstractly, letting emotion guide my brush. Other nights I worked on more representational pieces, desert landscapes, portraits of the women in my group, still lifes of ordinary objects rendered extraordinary through attention and care. The act of creating something from nothing felt revolutionary after years of having everything taken from me. One of the women in my painting class, a 72-year-old named Dorothy who'd survived a different kind of marriage, told me something I'll never forget. We were sitting in the studio late one evening, both of us working on pieces for an upcoming group show. "You know what they don't tell you about surviving abuse?" she said, not looking up from her canvas. "They make it sound like there's this clear before and after, like you were broken and now you're fixed. But it's not like that. What's it like? It's like being a tree that grew around a fence. The fence gets removed, but the shape of it remains in your trunk. You're still a tree. You can still grow, but you'll always carry the mark of what tried to contain you." I thought about that often in the months that followed. The mark Jack left on me would never fully disappear. Some part of me would always be the woman who believed his lies, who doubted her own memory, who sacrificed relationships for the illusion of peace. But I could grow around it. I could become something new while acknowledging what I'd survived. The legal settlement gave me financial stability. The therapy gave me tools to process trauma. The art gave me purpose and joy. But the real transformation came from something simpler and infinitely harder, learning to trust myself again. It started with small things, believing my memory when it contradicted someone else's version of events, making decisions without seeking external validation, setting boundaries with people who demanded more than I could give. Each small act of self-trust built on the last until I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back. She was older than the woman who'd stood in her kitchen pouring coffee 3 years earlier. The lines on her face were deeper, carved by stress and tears. But her eyes were different, clearer. She met her own gaze without flinching. A year after the divorce, I bumped into Jack at a coffee shop near Scottsdale. We'd successfully avoided each other since the settlement, moving in different circles despite living in the same city. But there he was, ordering at the counter while I waited for my latte. Our eyes met. He looked older too, the silver in his hair more pronounced, new lines around his mouth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The barista called out someone's order. The espresso machine hissed, normal sounds of a normal afternoon. Then he nodded. This small gesture of acknowledgement, and turned away. I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, not even satisfaction at his apparent aging. Just a mild awareness that this person had once been central to my life and now was simply a stranger in a coffee shop. That absence of feeling was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. I collected my latte, walked to my car, and drove to the studio where a blank canvas was waiting. I had better things to do than waste time thinking about Jack. Martha visited again in the spring, staying for a long weekend in my condo. We sat on my small balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades I was already mentally mixing on my palette. "You seem different," she observed. "Lighter somehow. I feel different." I paused, trying to articulate something I'd been thinking about. "You know how people say that surviving something makes you stronger? The whole, what doesn't kill you thing." She rolled her eyes. "I hate that phrase. It puts pressure on victims to turn trauma into some positive life lesson." "Exactly. What happened with Jack didn't make me stronger. It just showed me I was already strong. I'd always been strong. I just forgot for a while." Martha raised her wine glass, to remembering. We clinked glasses as the sun dipped below the horizon, and I thought about all the women out there who were where I'd been 3 years ago. Confused, isolated, doubting themselves, trapped in situations that slowly eroded their sense of reality and self-worth.
I wanted to reach through time and space and tell them what I'd learned. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I wish someone had told me decades ago. Financial abuse and coercive control are epidemics hiding in plain sight. They happen in nice neighborhoods to educated women. They happen gradually, almost invisibly, until you're so deep in it, you can't see the way out. Here's what I want you to understand. Financial abuse isn't just about money, it's about power and control. It's about one person systematically removing another person's ability to make independent choices. And it often follows a predictable pattern. First, there's isolation. The abuser slowly cuts you off from friends, family, support networks. They frame it as caring. We should spend more time together. Your friends are a bad influence. Your family doesn't understand us. But the goal is to eliminate outside perspectives that might contradict their narrative. Second, there's confusion and doubt. Gaslighting isn't just lying. It's making you question your own perception of reality. When someone consistently denies things you know happened, reframes conversations you clearly remember, and suggests you're forgetting or mistaken, they're not confused. They're conditioning you to distrust yourself. Third, there's financial control disguised as financial management. Joint accounts aren't inherently bad. But when one person has unilateral access and control while the other is kept in the dark, that's a red flag. When one person makes all financial decisions, monitors all spending, or has to approve purchases, that's not partnership. That's control. Fourth, there's reputation damage. If someone is spreading information about your mental health, your competence, your reliability, ask yourself why. Often, it's preemptive. They're building a narrative that will discredit you if you ever try to speak up. Here are some specific warning signs I wish I'd recognized earlier. Does your partner insist on controlling all financial accounts? Do they get angry or defensive when you ask questions about money? Have you noticed unexplained charges or withdrawals? Has your partner discouraged you from working or having your own income? Do you have to ask permission to spend money, even your own? Have friends or family mentioned they've heard concerning things about you from your partner? If you're answering yes to these questions, please understand you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. Trust your instincts. Here's what you can do to protect yourself, even if you're not ready to leave. First, document everything. Keep copies of financial statements, emails, text messages. If possible, create a secret email account that your partner doesn't know about and forward important documents to yourself. Take photos of documents with your phone and store them in a cloud account they can't access. Second, try to maintain at least one financial account that's yours alone. Even a small checking account can give you options in an emergency. If you work, have some of your paycheck deposited there. If you don't work, try to put aside cash when possible. Third, rebuild connections. I know how hard this is when you've been isolated, but reach out to one person, an old friend, a family member, anyone who might provide perspective and support. You don't have to tell them everything at first. Just start rebuilding those bridges. Fourth, educate yourself about your legal rights. Many lawyers offer free consultations. In Arizona and most states, there are legal aid organizations that help victims of financial abuse. You don't have to be ready to file for divorce to talk to a lawyer about protecting yourself. Fifth, and this is crucial, please talk to someone. A therapist, a domestic abuse hotline, a trusted friend. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 and can help with resources even if you don't think your situation qualifies as domestic violence. It does. Financial abuse is domestic violence. I learned that 40% of people in relationships experience some form of financial infidelity, hiding purchases, secret accounts, undisclosed debt. But financial infidelity and financial abuse are different. Infidelity is secretive. Abuse is about control. If your partner's financial behavior leaves you feeling powerless, trapped, or doubting your own judgment, that crosses the line into abuse. The other thing I want to emphasize is that leaving isn't always immediately possible or even the right choice for everyone's situation. But protecting yourself is always possible. Small steps count. Every document you save, every connection you maintain, every moment you trust your own perception, those are acts of resistance. And please, please break the silence. I spent years keeping Jack's behavior secret, partly because I was ashamed, partly because I didn't have the language to describe what was happening. But silence protects abusers. It traps you in cycles you're too ashamed to admit exist. When I finally started talking about what Jack had done, I was terrified people would judge me. How could you not know? Why did you stay so long? But mostly, what I got was recognition. So many women shared their own stories of financial control, of gaslighting, of slow erosion of autonomy. We'd all been suffering in isolation, thinking we were the only ones. Your story matters. Sharing it doesn't just help you. It helps every woman who hears it and recognizes her own experience. It helps the woman who's currently where I was 3 years ago, doubting herself and wondering if she's overreacting. It helps shift the culture that allows financial abuse to flourish in silence. One last thing I learned is that recovery isn't linear. Some days I felt strong and clear. Other days the self-doubt crept back in. Did I overreact? Was I too harsh? Could we have fixed it? These thoughts are normal. They're part of how trauma rewires your brain. Be patient with yourself. Healing isn't about never doubting yourself again. It's about having more good days than bad ones, and trusting that the trajectory is generally upward, even when it doesn't feel that way. Thank you for staying with me until the end. I know this was a long story, a difficult one in many ways, but I hope it gave you something valuable, whether that's recognition of your own experience, understanding of someone else's, or just the knowledge that survival is possible. I want to hear from you. What city are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Are you having coffee, commuting to work, lying in bed unable to sleep? I think about the people on the other end of these recordings all the time, wonder about your lives and stories. If this story resonated with you, if you felt seen or validated or understood, please hit the like button. It helps more people find these stories, and maybe the right story finds the right person at the right time. And please, leave a comment telling me what you would have done in my place. Would you have confronted Jack at that dinner party, or would you have handled it differently? Did I do enough to protect myself? Should I have pushed for criminal charges even though the lawyers said it was unlikely to succeed? I genuinely want to know what you think. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please consider it. We share stories like this one every week. Real experiences from real people navigating the messy, complicated business of being human. Your subscription helps us keep creating this content. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other videos that might interest you. The first is about recognizing the early warning signs of emotional manipulation in relationships. The second is a story from a woman who rebuilt her financial security after bankruptcy caused by a partner's gambling addiction. Both are linked in the description. Take care of yourselves out there. Guard your hearts, but don't let anyone convince you to doubt your own mind. You know what you know. Trust that. Until the next story, take care of your heart.